In this video, I will summarize one of the best survival films of this year titled Survive 2024. The film tells the story of a family trapped in a major natural disaster, which can be described as an apocalypse. The film opens with a view of underwater life filled with corals, jellyfish, and small fish. They appear to live peacefully and harmoniously until something unprecedented begins to shake the ocean currents around the world, suddenly causing chaos in marine life. The story then shifts to a family on vacation in the Caribbean Sea. This family consists of Tom, the father, Julia, the mother, Cassie, the older sister, and Ben, the younger brother. They are busy with their respective activities. Tom and Ben are fishing, Cassie is relaxing while listening to music, and Julia is swimming. While swimming, Julia suddenly feels something in the water. When she looks around, she doesn't see anything and the sea appears calm. A few seconds later, Julia feels a strong current pulling her away from the boat. Not only that, but the compass on the boat starts spinning uncontrollably. Julia screams for help, but Cassie, who is engrossed in listening to music, doesn't hear anything. Tom, who is fishing, finally hears her cries and immediately tells Cassie to steer the boat closer to Julia. Wait. Once the boat is close enough, Tom jumps into the sea to save his wife.
I got you. Mom.
Julia then informs her family that the ocean current suddenly pulled her south.
We never swim away from the boat.
That night, they celebrate Ben's 13th birthday, even though one family member is missing. Ben still seems happy, though. He receives a laptop as a gift from Tom and Julia, something he had wanted for a long time. Tom then warns Ben not to watch any adult content, or else he'll confiscate the laptop if he catches him.
Oh my gosh.
Move, just go there.
After the birthday party, Cassie receives a video call from her boyfriend, Andy, as they chat. Cassie notices a huge thunderstorm forming behind Andy, although Andy tries to assure her that the storm isn't dangerous. As it gets closer, their signal suddenly cuts out, leaving Cassie panicked. She quickly tells Tom that the city might be hit by a massive storm. However, before they can investigate further, they hear a strange whooshing sound coming from outside the boat. When they check, they find a group of whales behaving oddly, and one of them accidentally bumps into the underside of the boat. Worried about a possible leak, Tom decides to dive underwater to inspect it. Upon his return, he appears to have a wound on his shoulder. As a doctor, Julia quickly stitches up Tom's wound. While she works, Tom explains that the boat's bottom plate has bent and the propeller is also damaged. Meanwhile, Cassie tries to find a signal to contact Andy, but even after hours, there's still no connection. Their panic intensifies as their radio receives no response, as if there were no other people around. With the propeller damaged, Tom concludes that they're stranded. Still, he tries to reassure Julia, saying they're on a known waterway and should be found soon. Despite his efforts to stay optimistic, Tom is growing anxious knowing their food supplies will only last for 4 days.
6 gallons of water.
Suddenly, they hear a rumbling noise from above. When they look outside, they realize it's coming from glowing objects falling from the sky. As the objects get closer, Tom quickly decides to start the engine and steer the boat away.
Up there.
However, as they got closer, he realized that the objects were not meteors, but rather satellite debris suspected to have fallen due to the storm. Shortly after, strong winds began hitting their boat. Tom immediately told his family to go inside and close all doors and windows. However, the wind grew stronger, causing the boat to shake violently as if it were riding a tsunami wave. Due to the jolts, Tom and Julia were injured, while Cassie started vomiting.
Sit down. Oscar, Romeo, Charlie. Mayday, mayday.
Tom tried to send a distress signal, but the waves grew larger and the screen went dark. The next morning, the boat appeared calm and they woke up to assess the situation. When they stepped outside the boat, they were shocked to see that the seawater had disappeared and their boat was now perched on a rocky cliff that used to be the ocean floor. Armed with a map and a compass, Tom began to realize that the ocean had shifted north, meaning the poles of the Earth had shifted as well. The North Pole, which was supposed to be in the north, had now moved to the South Pole. This phenomenon, according to a reliable website, had occurred about 700 years ago. However, Tom and his family felt horrified because this meant that seawater had swept across the land all over the Earth, likely annihilating 99% of the human population. Hearing this fact, Cassie was deeply affected as she realized that her boyfriend might be gone. Julia then began to gather supplies, while Ben flew the leftover balloons from the previous night's party as his signals so that any survivors who might still be out there could see their presence.
Who's all the survivors? See?
Tom casually sent a signal through the radio, hoping someone would respond. After a few minutes of waiting, a man named Nudo answered. Nudo was the captain of a small submarine who had survived along with one of his crewmates because they were on a mission at the bottom of the sea when the disaster struck.
According to my instruments and the secret return.
Nudo explained that he had observed signs of systematic polar shifts and estimated that the poles would return to their original positions in about a week. However, the movement of the ocean would trigger a massive mega-tsunami, so he advised Tom and his family to find higher ground immediately. As a parent who prioritizes his children's safety, Tom asked Nudo if he could help Cassie and Ben. Nudo replied that his submarine was very small, only capable of holding 3 people, and fortunately, his partner had just died in a crab attack, so there was still space for both of Tom's children. Nudo then provided the coordinates of his submarine's location, which could be reached in 3 days on foot. With a week before the ocean returned, Tom asked Julia and the children to pack up quickly.
Why is so scientific about this stuff?
Only the children. I will stay connected on channel 16.
Good luck.
While they were packing, Tom saw a man approaching the ship with a dog. Without thinking twice, Tom approached the man to offer water. He then noticed that the man had an injury on his leg.
My wife's a doctor if you need any help.
However, as Tom was about to invite him onto the ship to treat his injury, the man suddenly attacked him with a spear, brutally killing Tom, the ungrateful man, let's call him Bagor, then turned on Julia, throwing his spear at her, but it missed and only struck Julia in the shoulder. Julia quickly handed Cassie the flare gun and hid Cassie and Ben inside a bench while she concealed herself behind the toilet, holding a knife to stay alert. Bagor managed to break down the door of the ship and immediately grabbed their food supplies. After that, he searched for Julia in the toilet, but Julia had already escaped through the ventilation hole and was hiding under the ship. Unfortunately, Bigger's dog found her and attempted to attack, forcing Julia to kill the dog in self-defense. Seeing his dog killed, Bagor became even more enraged. He chased Julia around until he finally caught her near the hiding place of Cassie and Ben. Seeing their mother in danger, Cassie bravely shot Bagor with a flare gun. The shot successfully knocked Bagor down, but the sparks generated began to ignite the entire ship. Julia quickly grabbed all the medical supplies, provisions, and maps before leading her two children away from the ship, which was starting to burn fiercely. As the three of them mourned Tom's death, suddenly Bagor emerged from the ship. Without thinking, Julia, Ben, and Cassie ran as fast as they could, just as the ship exploded. They ran across the rocky hills and took a rest in a rocky gorge, where the flowing water was undrinkable due to its saltiness. Here, Ben began to blame himself, feeling that he was the reason Bagor had come after flying his balloon. However, Julia reassured Ben that it was not his fault. As they rested, they saw Bagor in the distance and ran as fast as they could. During their escape, Ben found a dead shark and tried to take its meat, but Julia urged him to continue their flight because Bagor was still after them. In their flight, they passed hundreds of barrels filled with toxic waste and heaps of ocean debris that had accumulated on the rocky hillside. After feeling far enough away from Bagor, they discovered the wreckage of a private plane that had once sunk to the ocean floor. They decided to use the plane wreck as a resting place. While resting, Julia shared with her children how she first met Tom. At that time, Julia was treating a patient suffering from decompression sickness after a failed dive, and that patient was Tom. After being cared for by Julia for several days, they fell in love, and thus Cassie and Ben were born.
M'attendais à la sortie de l'hôpital, fait une déclaration d'amour.
That night, when everyone was asleep, Cassie woke up because she needed to use the bathroom. She then stepped out of the plane to relieve herself, but unbeknownst to her, Bagor had just arrived and was preparing to kill her. Fortunately, before that could happen, Julia appeared and stabbed Bagor several times until the man was dead. Now, Julia felt relieved because the threat from Bagor was no longer there. The next day, as they were about to continue their journey, they were startled by the mangled corpse of Bagor. From that, Julia realized that there was an even greater threat than Bagor: wild beasts.
On y va.
The three of them then continued their journey toward the coordinates given by Nudo. During the journey, Ben felt extremely thirsty, and since they had run out of drinking water, he ran towards a puddle of salt water filled with dead fish. Fortunately, before Ben could drink the salty water, Julia quickly stopped him. Julia and Cassie then guided Ben, who was becoming weak. Along the way, they found some plastic chairs and began to build a temporary shelter to rest. After the shelter was finished, Julia injected Ben with a vaccine to kill the bacteria in his body. As night began to fall, Julia heard strange sounds from outside. She stepped out of the shelter and was shocked to see thousands of Alaska crabs emerging from behind the hill. Julia quickly woke her children, and they ran as fast as they could to escape the crab's pursuit. During their escape, they spotted a large cargo ship where some survivors were gathering bottles of mineral water. Julia called out for help, but they refused and instead locked themselves inside a container. Finally, Julia, Cassie, and Ben decided to climb into the container. In the process, Julia's leg was severely injured as it was torn apart by the crabs. At that moment, the crabs found a hole leading into the container and began to attack and devour everyone inside. Meanwhile, Julia suddenly fainted from the crab bites. The next day, she woke up to find that Cassie and Ben were gone. Not only that, but strong winds began to sweep through the area, indicating that the poles were about to return to their original positions. Julia eventually reunited with Cassie and Ben, and the three of them went into the container to grab a rifle and some supplies. While waiting for the strong winds to subside, Julia cauterized her wound with powder. After the winds calmed down, they used the satellite phone belonging to one of the corpses to contact Nudo. Nudo informed Julia that his estimate about the return of the ocean was wrong, as the ocean would revert back in 3 hours. To determine its location, Nudo fired a flare gun that was spotted by Ben and Julia. Without hesitation, the three of them immediately set off toward Nudo, even though it was quite a distance away. Nevertheless, they kept walking until they reached a canyon filled with coral rocks. As they were almost out of the canyon, a sudden rockslide occurred, separating Cassie and Ben from Julia. With only 1 hour left before the ocean arrived, Julia urged Cassie to take Ben to Nudo as quickly as possible. Before leaving, Cassie and Ben expressed how much they loved Julia. The two of them then ran to the small submarine. Upon reaching the submarine, Cassie found Nudo dying from a crab attack. Realizing that he was about to die, Nudo advised Cassie to find Julia so they could all get inside the submarine together. Without thinking twice, Cassie ran back to the canyon to help Julia. Meanwhile, Julia, already desperate, was startled by the appearance of dozens of crabs. As a last act of resistance, Julia fired at the crabs with her gun. However, because there were too many of them, she ran out of bullets. As Julia resigned herself to her fate, suddenly Cassie appeared from behind the landslide and used all her strength to pull her mother out. Once they succeeded, both of them quickly ran to the submarine while being chased by thousands of Alaskan crabs. Julia, Cassie, and Ben then climbed aboard the ship, ensuring that the crabs could not reach them. However, once they were all inside the vessel, a massive tsunami from the North Pole came crashing down. The tsunami hit the submarine, causing Julia, Cassie, and Ben to be shaken violently. In that moment, Julia began to recall the beautiful memories she had shared with Tom before she ultimately lost consciousness. A few moments later, the three of them regained consciousness and found that the submarine had stopped shaking. They then exited the submarine and discovered they were on a beach near a major city that had been devastated by the disaster. The film ends with Julia, Cassie, and Ben embracing, ready to face the next chapter of their lives. Alright guys, that's the recap of the film Asterisk Survive 2020 for Asterisk. I hope you enjoyed it.